Leo had always been fascinated by old technology, especially the things his parents had left behind in the attic. He spent hours going through dusty boxes and broken gadgets. One afternoon, while digging through a pile of forgotten treasures, he found an old box labeled Starship Commander Simulator. It looked ancient, probably something his dad had played when he was a kid. Leo's curiosity sparked, and he quickly pulled the box from the pile and opened it. Inside was a dusty CD and a manual that looked like it had never been touched. He wiped the dust off the CD and tossed it into his computer's disk drive without a second thought. The loading screen popped up, and then the game began. The graphics were rudimentary, but charming in a way that reminded Leo of the early days of gaming. The interface was simple, and the music in the background gave it a nostalgic feel. Leo immediately dove into the campaign mode, where he was tasked with commanding a fleet of starships to protect a planet from a superior alien force. He glanced at the manual for a second, but then tossed it aside, preferring to learn through trial and error. He selected the easiest difficulty level and watched as his ships entered the battle. The enemy fleet appeared to be overwhelming. At first, a massive armada of ships that dwarfed his own, but Leo didn't panic. He had played enough strategy games to know that size didn't always mean strength. He began to issue orders to his fleet, moving them into position for a defensive stance, using asteroid fields to hide his ships and avoid the enemy's long-range sensors. He was confident in his abilities, but didn't expect what happened next. The enemy didn't just attack mindlessly, they adapted quickly, as if they knew his next move. Before he made it, Leo was taken aback for a moment, but quickly regained his composure. He issued new orders to his fleet and set his ships on evasive maneuvers. Yet again, the enemy adapted their strategy, shifting formations. As they pushed forward, they weren't just reacting, they were learning. Leo's heart began to race, but instead of panicking, he took a deep breath and thought about his options. The game wasn't just about shooting and moving, it was about thinking several moves ahead, predicting what the enemy would do next. With a feeling of exhilaration, Leo began to use that knowledge to his advantage. He knew that the key to winning was not brute force, but subtlety. He pulled back some of his ships, feigning retreat, to lure the enemy into a trap. His ships jumped into a cloaking field that the enemy couldn't detect, and with a sudden burst of speed, Leo's fleet emerged from hiding on the other side of the enemy's formation, catching them off guard. The alien ships scattered, trying to reorganize, but it was too late. Leo had already seized the initiative. He couldn't believe it as the first wave of enemy ships exploded into space dust, and the game awarded him victory. Leo leaned back in his chair, a grin on his face, as he stared at the screen. The whole thing had felt so real, so alive. It wasn't just a game, it was something more, like a puzzle that he had unlocked, and there was something deep inside him that told him this wasn't going to be the last time he would face something this complex and challenging. Little did Leo know the game wasn't just reacting to his moves, it was learning too. And in the dark reaches of space, an ancient and powerful being was already watching. Far across the galaxy, in a command center that hummed with the energy of advanced technology, Admiral Silence sat in his throne-like chair, his many eyes focused on the vast holographic display in front of him. The Virian Empire had conquered hundreds of star systems and defeated countless foes, but today was different. Today, something caught his attention. From a distant star system on the edge of Virian space came a signal. It was faint but unmistakable. Tylen's eyes narrowed as he zoomed in on the source. The signal was coming from a human world, Earth, a planet that had never been a threat to his empire. At first he thought it was nothing more than a low-level military experiment. The humans had been dabbling in their simulations for years, but this signal was strange. It was unlike any simulation he had ever encountered. It was far too complex for human software to have created. Silence's curiosity grew. He decided to investigate, personally opening a secure channel to his fleet's command center. He issued a direct order to his top engineers and intelligence officers to analyze the source of the signal immediately. As the engineers worked, Cylon's thoughts drifted back to his people. The Varians were a species of immense intellect. Their minds were capable of interacting directly with technology, and their mastery of warfare had made them the rulers of the galaxy. They had no equals, not in battle nor in strategy. Their empire spanned across countless systems, and they had never once been defeated on their home turf. But the signal from Earth nagged at him like a small stone in his shoe. The signal was growing stronger. The more Cylon watched, the more he realized it wasn't just a transmission, but a digital battlefield, a Starship simulator that seemed to be learning, adapting, evolving in real time. A human child was commanding a fleet within the game, and Cylon's experts were already analyzing the movements of the child's forces. What they found was unsettling. The tactics the child was using were sophisticated beyond what any human should be capable of devising. This wasn't just a game, it was a training ground for a tactical mind of extraordinary ability. Cylon watched intently as the human child led his fleet to victory after victory. Despite being vastly outnumbered, his movements were precise and unnerving. The enemy fleet, made of sophisticated eye-controlled ships, was outmatched in every encounter. The child wasn't just reacting to the simulation, he was controlling it as though he were a seasoned commander. Cylon leaned forward in his chair, his many eyes studying the holographic display more closely. Every move the child made was a perfect counter to the AI strategy. Each victory felt more like an act of genius than mere luck. The Varian Admiral's mind raced. He had faced some of the greatest minds the galaxy had to offer, but this human child was different. The child wasn't bound by the conventional thinking of warfare, nor by the constraints of their primitive technology. The child was unpredictable, and Cylon hated unpredictability in an opponent. It was a dangerous quality that made them harder to control, and even harder to defeat. For the first time in years, Cylon felt a cold stir of doubt in his mind. Could this child be more than just an anomaly? Could this be the beginning of a threat to his empire? Cylon had to know more, but he was also growing impatient. This game wasn't just a curiosity anymore, it was a challenge he intended to face head-on. And so he ordered his fleet to take action. He would enter the simulation himself and discover the extent of this child's capabilities. He would see if this human truly was as dangerous as he appeared, or if it was all just a fluke. But either way, Cylon was determined to find out once and for all. As Leo sat at his desk, he felt a rush of excitement after winning his first battle in the Starship simulator. He hadn't expected the game to feel so real or so thrilling, but as he moved on to the next campaign, he realized it was even more complex than he had anticipated. The enemy forces were stronger now, and they outnumbered his fleet by a large margin. But Leo wasn't intimidated. In fact, he welcomed the challenge. He had a natural knack for strategy, his mind quickly analyzing the enemy's movements, as if he had been playing games like this his whole life. His fingers flew across the keyboard, issuing commands to his fleet, positioning his ships in ways that made no logical sense to any observer at first glance. He pulled his ships back into a tight formation, hiding them behind an asteroid belt to avoid enemy sensors. The enemy fleet, massive and imposing, began advancing across the virtual battlefield. But Leo was ready. He knew the key to victory wasn't direct confrontation, but timing and surprise. He observed the enemy fleet's behavior, noting subtle patterns in their movements. The ships that Cylon's AI had placed in command were predictably defensive, always staying in tight formations and avoiding risky moves. Leo decided to exploit that predictability by feigning a retreat, luring them into a trap that would force them to overextend their reach. He sent his fleet into a jump to the far side of the battlefield, leaving the enemy chasing after a ghost. The next few moves were a blur as Leo's fleet struck from unexpected angles, hitting the flanks of the enemy ships and retreating just as quickly, using the enemy's own formations against them every time they tried to adapt. Leo was already one step ahead. He could almost feel the rhythm of the game now, the ebb and flow of the battle, like it was a dance that only he knew the steps to. In a few short minutes, Leo had outmaneuvered the enemy, causing them to retreat. He sat back, staring at the screen in awe of his own victory. It was a feeling he had rarely experienced outside of playing games, but this time it felt different. Something about this simulation was pulling him deeper into its world, And with every new challenge, his mind became more absorbed. He couldn't stop now. The stakes had somehow grown higher in his mind, even though it was just a game. Far across the galaxy, Xylan was already watching as Leo's fleet decimated the Eye's forces once again. The Varian Admiral's concern deepened as he saw the human child's tactics evolve at an unnerving pace. Leo wasn't just playing the game, he was learning, adapting, and devising new strategies. With each battle, Xylan's intelligence officers reported that the child's moves weren't like anything a human had ever done before. They were too creative, too unpredictable, and most disturbing of all, they were working. Xylan knew that this child was different from the rest of the humans he had encountered over the centuries. This wasn't just a boy playing a simple game. This was a mind capable of devising the kind of strategies that even the Varian Empire's most brilliant tacticians had trouble understanding. The more Xylan watched, the more certain he became that Leo was no ordinary child. His actions spoke of a potential far beyond the capabilities of Earth's technology or its people. Xylan clenched his fists in frustration. He had underestimated this human. Now he was facing a challenge he wasn't sure he was prepared for. The simulation was no longer just a game. It was a proving ground for a mind capable of reshaping the very future of war in the galaxy. Xylan leaned forward in his chair, his many eyes fixated on the holographic display as Leo's fleet tore through another enemy formation with unnatural precision. The child's tactics were a perplexing mix of calculated brilliance and wild unpredictability. Xylan had seen tactical minds before, but nothing like this. Nothing that operated outside the bounds of what his species would consider logical or possible. He couldn't afford to wait any longer. The time had come for him to take matters into his own hands, to test this human child firsthand. Xylan ordered his fleet to engage in the simulation, but not in the usual way. He had his ships move in unexpected patterns, aiming to throw off the child's calculations. He needed to see if Leo could adapt to a new level of unpredictability, one that wasn't confined to the limitations of the game's air. As Leo navigated through the next battle, the AI fleet suddenly shifted in ways it never had before. In previous rounds, the enemy formations grew erratic, charging forward and retreating at odd intervals, leaving Leo scrambling to adjust. At first, he was caught off guard, but then something strange happened. Leo quickly adapted to the new patterns, analyzing and exploiting the weaknesses and the chaotic movements of the enemy fleet. It was almost as if he had anticipated this shift before it even happened. Leo's heart raced as he processed the new threat before him. The game had just ramped up in difficulty, but instead of feeling fear, he felt exhilaration. The challenge was exactly what he had been hoping for. His fingers flew over the keys, issuing commands faster than ever, adjusting his strategy as the enemy grew more unpredictable. The simulated ships danced around him, but he moved with confidence, knowing that he was still in control. Xylan watched as the child's fleet responded to his every move with an uncanny grace. The human child's decisions were instantaneous, precise, and effective in a way that defied logic. It was as though Leo could sense his every move before he made it, and that unnerved Xylan to the core. This wasn't just a game anymore. The child was playing on a level that was beyond anything Xylan had imagined. Feeling a surge of frustration, Xylan decided to intervene more directly. He accessed a special feature in the simulator's code that allowed him to take control of the enemy fleet himself, overriding the AI's decisions for a more organic approach. His fleet would now move as if under his direct command, with each ship acting independently in real time. But even as he did this, a nagging doubt crept into his mind. What if the child could still outwit him? The battle escalated further, but to Xylan's shock, Leo did something completely unexpected. He stopped reacting as he had before. Instead of continuing to defend, he went on the offensive, launching a counterattack that was too fast for Xylan's fleet to respond to in time. Leo's ships cut through the enemy ranks like a hot knife through butter, taking out key vessels with pinpoint precision. Xylan clenched his fists in disbelief. This human child was thinking beyond the scope of the simulation, outmaneuvering him at every turn. His fleet was now in disarray, and the child's victory seemed inevitable. The Varian Admiral's mind raced, Searching for answers, his people had never encountered an enemy that could think so quickly, that could adapt so thoroughly to their own tactics. He was facing an opponent who refused to be outplayed. It was then that Cylon realized the truth. This wasn't a child playing a game anymore. This was a mind operating on a level that was completely foreign to him. This human had the potential to change the course of warfare in the galaxy, and the Varian Empire could not afford to let that happen. Cylon sat back in his chair, his calm demeanor now shattered for the first time in years. He had met an adversary that threatened not just his position, but the very foundation of his empire. Cylon's mind churned as the simulation ended in a decisive victory for the human child. The simulation screen flickered briefly before returning to the main menu, but Cylon couldn't tear his gaze away from the final result. He had watched as the child's fleet decimated his forces in ways he hadn't thought possible, and now, for the first time in centuries, Cylon questioned his own superiority. The Varian Empire had dominated the galaxy through precision and intellect, but here, before him, was an enemy who seemed to understand the nature of warfare in a way he couldn't comprehend. His officers had been running simulations on Leo's tactics, attempting to analyze the child's strategies through their advanced algorithms, but the results were clear. They had no explanation for his brilliance. The child's moves weren't based on cold, calculated logic or the predictable patterns that I could exploit. Instead, they were based on an intuition that seemed to defy all conventional reasoning. Cylon paced back and forth in his command center, his claws scraping against the metallic floor in agitation. This wasn't just about outsmarting a simple simulation anymore. Leo's strategies were pushing the boundaries of what was possible in warfare. They were revolutionary, unpredictable, yet grounded in an understanding of the dynamics of conflict that Cylon had only seen in the most experienced commanders. But Leo was a child, and that made the entire situation more dangerous than Cylon had initially realized. If this was how the human mind worked at such a young age, then what would it be like as the child matured? What kind of force could the Varian Empire be up against if Leo ever left Earth? Cylon's thoughts raced. He needed to confront the child directly, to understand how Leo was able to think the way he did. But there was something else gnawing at him, a suspicion that this was no accident, that the game was merely a way for Leo to test his own limits and refine his tactics in preparation for something larger. Cylon knew the Varian Empire had never encountered an adversary like this, and he began to wonder if his empire's future was at risk in ways he had never imagined. Send the message. Cylon ordered his officers, his voice cold and deliberate. His mind was already racing with plans. He had to know everything about this human, and about how Leo was able to think beyond the limitations of Earth's primitive technology. He would initiate a direct communication, bypassing the simulation's standard protocols, to challenge the child in ways he had never been challenged before. Meanwhile, Leo continued to play, unaware of the storm that was brewing on the other side of the galaxy. He had grown accustomed to winning the battles in the game, feeling a sense of pride with each victory. But there was something different about this last campaign, something that made his heart race as he moved his fleet into position to face the next wave of enemy ships. He felt a strange sense of being watched. The feeling was subtle, but it lingered like an unsettling presence he couldn't shake. As he navigated through the next round, the AI's movements felt different. They were more reactive, more precise, almost as though they were anticipating his every move. Leo's pulse quickened as he realized that the game was adapting faster than he could control, and that wasn't all. There was an unfamiliar message waiting for him on his screen, one that wasn't part of the game's normal structure. The message read, "I have been watching your progress, human. This is no longer a game. Prepare yourself for what is to come." Leo froze, staring at the screen, his mind struggling to process what he had just read. For a moment, he thought it was just another part of the game, but the cold, impersonal tone of the message felt too real, too personal to ignore. Something had changed, and it was far bigger than anything he could have expected. Leo stared at the screen in shock, his heart pounding in his chest. The words from the mysterious message seemed to pierce the quiet of his room, hanging in the air like an eerie omen. Prepare yourself for what is to come. The words reverberated in his mind, and a strange unease washed over him. He rubbed his eyes, convinced he must be imagining things after all. This was just a game, right? But something didn't sit right as he moved his fleet into position for the next round. Leo noticed that the AI ships were more precise than ever before, anticipating his every move with disturbing accuracy. He hadn't made any changes to his strategy, yet the enemy seemed to be countering him before he could even react as his ships faced off against the new wave of enemy forces. He felt a chill crawl up his spine. He was being watched, no longer by the game's eye, but by something, or someone, much more intelligent. From across the galaxy, Admiral Tylan watched the human child's every move, his many eyes locked onto the holographic display, focused intently on Leo's actions, as Leo's fleet faced an enemy that now seemed to know his tactics inside and out. Tylan's lips curled into a cold smile. It was time to move beyond the simulation. Tylan had been prepared for this moment. He had already initiated a covert surveillance program, designed to monitor Leo in real time without the child's knowledge. Unbeknownst to Leo, his every action was being tracked by Varian technology that went far beyond the simple digital warfare of the simulation. Leo had unknowingly triggered a network of high-tech sensors and covert systems that Tylan had set in motion the moment he first sensed the child's unusual brilliance. Tylan's fleet remained stationed in the outskirts of Varian-controlled space, but his mind was locked onto the simulation like a predator stalking its prey through his network of spies, artificial intelligence, and direct observation. He was now fully immersed in Leo's every move. The simulation had become a living battlefield for him, not just a testing ground for Leo's skills, but a reflection of the child's mind itself. As Tylan watched, he saw more than just a game player. He saw a brilliant strategist capable of outthinking the most seasoned Varian commanders. The more Tylan observed, the more he understood the danger Leo posed to his empire. The child's unpredictability was the most dangerous weapon of all in the hands of someone like Leo. That unpredictable genius could turn the tide of any conflict, and Tylan couldn't afford to let that happen. It wasn't just Earth he had to worry about now. It was the entire galaxy. Leo's moves became even more erratic as the game continued to evolve. Every time he adjusted his tactics to counter the AI's sudden changes, Tylan would alter the parameters again, forcing the simulation to push Leo to new limits. But Leo never faltered. Instead, he adapted, learned, and improved at an alarming rate. Tylan had been hoping for a break, a weakness in Leo's strategy, but every time he thought he had cornered the child, Leo found a way out. The game was no longer just a simulation. It was a live battlefield. Tylan realized that Leo had unknowingly begun treating the entire experience as a test of his own limits, and that level of self-awareness in a child was unprecedented. It was clear to Tylan that Leo had no intention of stopping. He was already preparing for something greater. Back in his room, Leo felt a strange tension in the air. He had been winning so far, but this new level of intensity felt different. The game had stopped feeling like a game at all. It was like every move he made was met with a response he couldn't predict, and it was starting to take a toll on his confidence. Each time he thought he outsmarted the simulation, it would surprise him with a new challenge. He couldn't shake the feeling that something else was at play here, something bigger than the game itself. He paused, staring at the screen with growing suspicion as the enemy forces closed in on his fleet again. And then, out of nowhere, the message appeared again. You are not alone. Human, your moves have been observed for far longer than you realize. Leo froze, his fingers hovering above the keyboard as the weight of those words sank in. The game wasn't watching him anymore. It was something else, something far more dangerous. Leo's mind raced as he stared at the message on his screen. You are not alone, human. Your moves have been observed for far longer than you realize. The words seemed to pulse with an eerie finality, sending a cold shiver down his spine. He had thought it was just a game, a harmless simulation to test his skills. But now the lines between reality and the virtual world were beginning to blur. Leo couldn't shake the growing sense that something was watching him, something far beyond his understanding. He quickly typed a response, his fingers trembling as he tried to process what was happening. Who is this? What do you want? He stared at the screen, waiting for the response, but the game didn't offer an immediate reply. Instead, the enemy ships in the simulation continued to advance, their movements even more aggressive than before, as if the game itself were aware of his distraction, and it was pushing him to focus. Minutes ticked by, and Leo's thoughts swirled. The message had shaken him, but he couldn't afford to lose his focus, not now with the enemy fleet bearing down on him. He had to fight for his victory yet. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on him. Was this some kind of new level in the game? Was it some advanced AI tactic? Or was it something more sinister? Before he could decide, the screen flickered again, and a new message appeared. We are watching you, human. You have no idea what you are truly facing. Prepare for what comes next. Leo's fingers hovered above the keys, the air in his room growing dense with tension. He wanted to reply, to demand more answers, but the truth was dawning on him. This was no longer just about a game. It wasn't even just about strategy or victory. It was something far bigger, something that had pulled him into a conflict far beyond the boundaries of his world. He had been playing against something real, and now that reality was closing in on him. Back on his homeworld, Admiral Tylan was prepared for the next phase. His fleet had already been mobilized, and his most elite forces were positioned to strike from the shadows. The simulation was no longer just a testing ground. It was now the arena for Leo's judgment. Tylan had been toying with the child, observing, analyzing, but now the Virian Admiral was done with the games. He was ready to make his presence known. Open the channel, Tylan ordered, his voice calm but laced with menace. His officers complied immediately, and soon the holographic communication screen flickered to life, revealing Leo's face on the other side. The child's expression was one of confusion and unease, but it was clear that he had already realized something was amiss. You've been playing my game, human. Tylan's voice resonated through the transmission, his multiple eyes glinting with an almost predatory gleam. I've been watching your every move, and now it's time for you to face the consequences of your actions. Leo's heart skipped a beat, but he stood his ground. He wasn't sure who or what he was talking to, but one thing was certain: this was no ordinary opponent. What do you want from me? Leo's voice trembled slightly, though he tried to keep his tone steady. This is just a game, right? You're just an eye or something, right? Tylan's laugh echoed coldly through the transmission, the sound unsettling in its depth. You are mistaken, human. I am not an eye. I am Admiral Tylan of the Virian Empire, and I've been observing you for some time now. Your brilliance in this game has intrigued me, but I've seen enough. You are no ordinary child. You are a threat to the galaxy. Leo's eyes widened in disbelief, his mind struggling to make sense of what he was hearing. You've been watching me. But why? Tylan's expression hardened, his many eyes narrowing. Your tactics, your mind, they are unlike anything I've encountered from your kind. You possess a genius that has the potential to reshape the future of warfare. You've outplayed my simulations, but now you must face the true challenge. A real war, not just a game. Leo took a step back, feeling the weight of the situation settle over him. He had been thrust into something far beyond anything he could have imagined. It was no longer just about winning a game. It was about survival, and a conflict that could reshape everything he knew. We will see how well you adapt, human. Tylan's voice was cold, almost mocking. But make no mistake, this is not a game anymore. Prepare yourself for the real fight. The transmission cut off abruptly, and Leo was left staring at the dark screen, his mind racing. He had just been thrown into a war against an empire he had never heard of, an empire that was far more advanced and far more dangerous than anything he could have imagined. The game had ended, but the real battle was only just beginning. The screen went black, leaving Leo alone in his room, the eerie silence pressing down on him. His mind raced, trying to process everything that had just happened. This wasn't some advanced game. It wasn't even a test. It was real. The Virian Empire, a massive and powerful alien force, was watching him. And the stakes had just escalated from a game to a galactic war. He had been forced into a role he had never asked for, but one that now seemed unavoidable. Leo's breath quickened as he walked in a circle, his mind swirling with the implications of the message. He was no longer just a kid playing in a digital world. He was now a strategist in a war he couldn't escape. The aliens were real, and they weren't interested in taking prisoners. But as the realization set in, a spark of clarity began to form in his mind. The feeling of being watched, the strange sensation that had nagged him throughout the simulation. It wasn't a coincidence. It had all been leading up to this moment. The game, the enemy ships, the strategies. It was all a test, and Leo had passed. But passing the test didn't mean he was safe. It meant the real battle had only just begun. Suddenly, the screen flickered to life again. This time with a new message: do not be so quick to dismiss your worth. Human, the words appeared on the screen, seemingly timed with the pounding of his heartbeat. Leo stared at them, a sense of cold dread creeping up his spine as he read them over and over. What do you want from me? Leo typed quickly, still reeling from the last exchange. He didn't know what else to ask. He had no clue how to approach this situation. The message changed. I want you to understand what is at stake. There was a pause before a new set of images appeared on the screen. A hologram of a galaxy, dotted with the Varian fleet ships, loomed over the message. It was a map of the galaxy, stretching beyond anything Leo could comprehend: stars, planets, and systems. This was real, not a simulation. And at the center of it, the Varian Empire's territory, expanding like a dark cloud, consuming everything in its path. The Varians will not stop until they have conquered all in their path. Earth will not be spared. The words hung in the air, and Leo's blood ran cold. He could feel the weight of the Empire's gaze pressing down on him. He wasn't just fighting for fun anymore. He was fighting for survival, for the future of humanity. But the message didn't end there, however. You have the power to stop them. Your brilliance, your strategies, they can change the course of this war. The holographic galaxy map shifted again, and Leo saw the symbols of his own fleet scattered in a pattern far from Earth, a potential war room where decisions could be made, where the fight could truly begin. Leo's mind raced. He had been given an impossible task, one that no child should have to face. But in that moment, he realized something. The things he had learned from the game, the victories he had achieved, they weren't just for show. They had prepared him for something far greater than himself. They had prepared him for a war, and now it was up to him to lead. With shaking hands, Leo took a deep breath and typed one last response: I'll fight. I'll do whatever it takes to protect Earth. The message returned: good. But know this, human, this will not be easy. You will face challenges beyond your comprehension, but you have what it takes to defeat us. The transmission cut off, and the screen went dark once again. But this time, Leo wasn't frozen in fear. He was determined. The game had ended, but the war had just begun. Leo stood up, feeling a new sense of purpose flood through him. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was a commander, and the galaxy's future rested on his shoulders. He wasn't going to let the Varians destroy everything he cared about. He would fight back, using every bit of strategy, every ounce of his genius to outwit the Empire. And as the world outside his window seemed to stretch into an uncertain future, Leo knew one thing: he was ready.